Okay, so we are going to look at the first couple. Sorry, I had to get adjusted. We're gonna look at the prologue in chapter 1 of Invisible Man. Now, I haven't ever, I've never read to a video camera before, so bear with me. I'm used to being able to ask people questions, and so it may be a little awkward at first. But okay, so the prologue. I'm an invisible man. No, I'm not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I'm a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I'm invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows. It's as though I've been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves or figments of their imagination, indeed everything and anything except me. Nor is my visibility exactly a matter of biochemical accident to my epidermis. That invisibility to which I refer occurs because of a particular disposition of the eyes with whom I come in contact, a matter of construction of their inner eyes, those eyes with which they look through their physical eyes upon reality. So he's not saying that he's actually visible. Like he knows people can see him, but do they really see him? Like, do they see him for who he is? Do they see him for his thoughts, his independent emotions and things like that? So he's not like actually talking about being a ghost or something, okay? I'm not complaining, nor am I protesting either. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often rather wearing on the nerves. Then too, you're constantly being bumped against by those of poor vision. Again, not actually being bumped against physically, but metaphorically. Okay. Or again, you often doubt if you really exist. You wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds, say a figure in a nightmare which the sleeper tries with all his strength to destroy. It's when you feel like this that, out of resentment, you begin to bump people back. And let me confess, you feel that way most of the time. You ache with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world, that you're a part of all the sound and anguish, and you strike out with your fists. You curse and you swear to make them recognize you, and alas, it's seldom successful. So the stuff he's saying about like being bumped against by the people, that he's part of a nightmare in which people try to wake up and that he bumps back from people. He's talking about like bumping back against people who do not believe who he is, that he is a person like they are, okay? And bumping back against people is not necessarily just bumping, but maybe something a little more forceful, all right? One night I accidentally bumped into a man, and perhaps because of the near darkness, he saw me and called me an insulting name. I sprang at him, seized his coat lapels, and demanded that he apologize. He was a tall blond man, and my face came close to his. He looked insolently out of his blue eyes and cursed me. His breath hot in my face as he struggled. Now let's go here and look at the blue eyes. First of all, archetypally, blue is a color of like purity, spiritual purity. And you'll study more about archetypes next week. I think next week's when I have it written down, but you're going to study more about archetypes next week. But blue is spiritual purity, like a pure blue lake or something. You can see to the bottom of it. Eyes are the window of the soul. So Ellison's saying that this guy was pure, like his intentions were pure, his soul was pure. His reaction was just because he'd been bumped against, right? I pulled his chin down sharp upon the crown of my head, butting him as I had seen the West Indians do, and I felt his flesh tear and the blood gush out, and I yelled, "Apologize, apologize!" But he continued to curse and struggle, and I butted him again and again until he went down heavily on his knees, profusely bleeding. I kicked him repeatedly in a frenzy because he still uttered insults though his lips were frothy with blood. Oh yes, I kicked him, and in my outrage I got my knife and I prepared to slit his throat right there beneath the lamplight in the deserted street, holding him in the collar with one hand and opening the knife with my teeth, when it occurred to me that the man had not seen me. Actually, that he, as far as he knew, was in the midst of a walking nightmare. I stopped the blade, slicing the air as I pushed him away, letting him fall back to the street. I stared at him hard as the lights of a car stabbed through the darkness. He lay there, moaning on the asphalt, a man almost killed by a phantom. It unnerved me. I was both disgusted and ashamed. I was like a drunken man myself, wavering about on weakened legs. Then I was amused. Something in this man's thick head had sprung out and beaten him within an inch of his life. So this man's nightmare that he's talking about, or this assumed version of the man that he didn't know that bumped into him, it was his nightmare. Like, when you see someone and you judge them on how they look, you can only assume things about them, right? If you're judging plainly, like, on appearance. Like, if you see somebody out on the street with like a mohawk, engaged ears, you're going to assume something about them versus somebody like in basketball shorts and a tournament shirt. We do this as human beings, but what Ellison is talking about is not necessarily, just judging a book by its cover, like we say, but he's talking about people judging other people by their race, right? And so he's saying that something out of this man's thick head, which thick head means that nothing could get in through it, thick head had sprung out and beaten him within an inch of his life. So it's like Ellison wasn't even really being himself. He was being that stereotype that the man thought he was. So this man's suppositions are all in his head. Even though his soul is pure, even though he doesn't really believe these things, he only goes off of what he supposes and what he has been taught, and that is that black men are going to kill him. Okay. Anyway, back to the reading. I began to laugh at this crazy discovery. Would he have awakened at the point of death? Would death himself have freed him for wakeful living? But I didn't linger. I ran away into the dark, laughing so hard I figured I might rupture myself. The next day I saw his picture in the Daily News, beneath a caption stating he had been mugged. Poor fool. Poor blind fool. I thought with sincere compassion, mugged by an invisible man. Most of the time, although I do not choose, as I once did, to deny the violence of my days by ignoring it, I'm not so overtly violent. I remember that I am invisible and walk softly so as not to waken the sleeping ones. Sometimes it's best not to awaken them. There are a few things in the world as dangerous as sleepwalkers. I learned in time, though, that it is possible to carry on a fight against them without their realizing it. For instance, I've been carrying on a fight with Monopolized Light and Power for some time now. I use their service and pay them for nothing at all, and they don't know it. Oh, they suspect power is being drained off, but they don't know where. All they know is that according to the master meter back there, in their power station, a hell of a lot of free current is disappearing into somewhere into the jungle of Harlem. So let's go back here and look at this section. Monopolized Light and Power. Monopolized means that it's a monopoly. Then nobody has a chance to compete with them. And so they own everything. Okay, they're all powerful. Now he's talking about like covertly fighting this guy. It'd be like going in and moving something on someone's desk just enough to annoy them, but not really actually taking any sort of credit for it. So it's not really, you're not really standing up to anything. You're just you think you're doing something, but really it's actually not. So light and power. So monopolized light and power. So they've got a monopoly, and light means what? Archetypally, light is, the truth. So they have a monopoly on the truth and the power in this situation, okay? But he's sticking it to them, right? He's the little man sticking it to them. Now he talks about the jungle of Harlem. Historically, Harlem was a place where the black people lived, and jungle. If you think about jungle, it's wild, it's savage, and it's where most where savage people would live, uncultured. It's where uncultured people would live, and so these people monopolized light and power are seeing that all of this power is draining off into the jungle of Harlem, and so he's setting things apart there, okay? The joke, of course, is that I don't live in Harlem, but in a border area. Several years ago, before I discovered the advantages of being invisible, I went through the routine process of buying service and paying their outrageous rates. The advantages of being invisible: if nobody notices you, you can get away with a lot, right? But if no one notices you, that also kind of stinks, because no one is taking you seriously, people are not listening to you and your ideas and things like that. But no more. I gave up all that, along with my apartment and my old way of life. That way based on the fallacious assumption that I, like other men, was visible. Now, aware of my invisibility, I live rent-free in a building rented strictly to whites, in a section of the basement that was shut off and forgotten during the 19th century, which I discovered when I was trying to escape in the night from Raz the Destroyer. Thus getting too far ahead of the story, almost to the end, although the end is in the beginning and lies far ahead. So the prologue of this book happens It was written after everything in the book happened. And so the narrator here has already experienced everything that we're just about to read about. And so he's coming from a place of experience. Now, he's talking about this building, this basement. So a basement is, subterranean. It's not where the normal regarded people live. And it was a building rented strictly to whites. So there's a little bit of a, he's living in this building that had just been for white people. So again, kind of sticking it to the man, but he's in the basement. So that's like sub important, not as important as everyone else. The point is, now that I found a home, or a hole in the ground, as you will. Now, don't jump to the conclusion that because I call my home a hole, it's damp and cold like a grave. There are warm, cold holes and warm holes. Mine is a warm hole. And remember, a bear retires to his hole for the winter and lives until spring. Then he comes strolling out like the Easter chick breaking from its shell. I say all this to assure you that it is incorrect to assume that because I'm invisible and live in a hole, I'm dead. I'm neither dead nor in a state of suspended animation. Call me Jack the Bear, for I am in a state of hibernation. So he's a wild animal in a state of hibernation, meaning after he comes out of hibernation, he's going to go into action, right? So it's like he's getting ready to pounce. My hole is warm and full of light. Yes, full of light. I doubt if there's a brighter spot in New York than this hole of mine, and I do not exclude Broadway or the Empire State Building on a photographer's dream night. But that's taking advantage of you. Those two spots are among the darkest of our whole civilization. Pardon me, our whole culture. An important distinction I've heard, which might sound like a hoax or a contradiction, but the contradiction I mean, is how the world moves. Not like an arrow, but a boomerang. Beware of those who speak of the spiral of history. They're preparing a boomerang. Keep a steel helmet handy. So how can the Empire State Building and Broadway, they're illuminated all the time and gorgeous, be some of the darkest places? It's because there are invisible people there. It's because they're not, the invisible man and all of the other minorities are not recognized in these places. They're dark because they don't know what's going on. Okay, they're not informed. They're not enlightened, right? I always like that, preparing a boomerang, keep a steel helmet handy. Like, history is going to fly out and it's going to fly back at you and hit you in the head. See, I know I've been boomeranged across the head so much now that I now can see the darkness of lightness. And I love light. Perhaps you'll think it's strange that an invisible man should need light, desire light, love light. But maybe it's exactly because I'm invisible. Light confirms my reality, gives birth to my form. A beautiful girl once told me of a recurring nightmare in which she lay in the center of a dark room and felt, her face expand until her eyes ran in bilious jelly up the chimney. And so it was with me. Without light, I am not invisible, only invisible, but formless as well. And to be unaware of one's form is to live a death. I myself, after existing some 20 years, did not become alive until I discovered my invisibility. So he wasn't really who he was. He couldn't really live until he had figured out who he was in the world. Okay. That's why I fight my battle with monopoly of light and power. The deeper reason, it allows me to feel my vital aliveness. I also fight them for taking so much of my money before I learn to protect myself. In my hole in the basement, there are exactly 1,369 lights. We've wired the entire ceiling, every inch of it. And not with fluorescent bulbs, but the older, more expensive to operate kind. Sticking it to the man, right? The filament type. And I have to sabotage, I've already begun to wire the wall. A junk man I know, a man of vision, has supplied me with wire and sockets. Nothing, storm or flood, must get in the way of our need for light, and ever more and brighter light. The truth is light, and light is the truth. So he wants to shed all of this light on himself and the truth. When I finish all four walls, then I'll start on the floor. Just how that will go, I don't know. Yet when you've lived invisible as long as I have, you develop a certain ingenuity. I'll solve the problem, and maybe I'll invent a gadget to place my coffee pot on the fire while I lie in bed, and even invent a gadget to warm my bed, like the fellow I saw in one of those picture magazines, who made himself a gadget to warm his shoes. Though invisible, I'm in the great American tradition of tinkers. That makes me kin to Ford, Edison, Franklin. Call me, since I have a theory and a concept, a thinker-tinker. Yes, I'll warm my shoes. They need it. They're usually full of holes. I'll do that and more.